Hello and welcome to this panel hosted by FT Live and Johnson Controls. I'm George Hammond, the property correspondent at the Financial Times, and we're here today with an excellent panel to discuss one of the hottest topics in property and beyond at the moment, which is how to reduce the emissions from the built environment. We have a stellar lineup today. We have Katie McGinty, who is Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Johnson Controls, Christina Gamboa, who is the Chief Executive of the World Green Building Council, and Mahesh Ramanujam, who is the President and Chief Executive of the US Green Building Council. Thank you all very much for joining us. And thank you to the audience for dialing in today. I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion. We would like you to submit audience questions throughout, so that should be relatively straightforward, but there's a box on your screen. Please put questions there as and when they come up, and we will come to them throughout the discussion. So I think that is the only bit of housekeeping. If you are going to tweet, as it says on the bottom of your screens, please join the conversation using the hashtag #FTDigitalDialogues. I think that is everything for the audience. So we want to spend the bulk of today's session talking about some of the practical solutions to this question. It's, as I said, one of the livest debates at the moment in the world of property, and we have huge climate talks coming up next month in the form of COP26. So the urgency and the pertinence of this discussion is only really rising, and today's panel are very well equipped to talk about some of the practical solutions to lowering emissions in the built environment. But before we get into some of the strategies and the solutions, I just wanted to give some sense of the problem. And I'm going to turn to Christina here to just give us really a sense of why we're having this conversation today, what the scale of the problem is. And then from there, let's jump into some of the solutions. Christina, perfect. Let's start with the muting and then get it out of our systems.
Okay, thank you. I was saying, hello everyone. Thank you. Yes, so the scale of the challenge, but also the scale of the opportunity. We know that the building and construction industry today, because of its unsustainability, is actually responsible for almost 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions related to energy consumption. And also it's demanding a lot of materials. At least 50% of the materials produced worldwide go into the construction industry. And as the world continues to grow and urbanize, we know that the building stock will double by 2060. And today, the rate of investment in quality infrastructure is not right. Every cent that is invested in retrofitting or new construction should be having criteria at least of the highest energy efficiency possible and unlocking the possibility for this sector to be a solution to climate change. So I think the opportunity is there, and I guess I look forward to seeing what fellow panelists think about that challenge.
Mm-hmm. And Mahesh, I wanted to bring you in here just to break down in a bit more detail. When we talk about emissions from the built environment, and Christina has just laid out there very clearly how big an issue this is, where are we looking for those emissions? I'm sat in an office surrounded by colleagues here. The three of you are at home, and I imagine a lot of our audience are in one of those two places. Are we talking about emissions from the construction, ongoing emissions? Where are we looking for those in the life cycle of a building?
I think just to kind of go back to your earlier question, Ben, related to why this problem is huge, right? So if I could just start there a little bit and then come back into this. I think it's very important to reflect. We can't ignore the fact that despite the tremendous contributions that green buildings have made, the green building movement has been worked for 30 years. And from USGBC point of view, we are now at this point of time at 109,000 projects participating in our LEED program. We still have not reversed buildings' overall contribution to our global CO2 emissions. And then last year, we saw global lockdowns and a sense of optimism prevailed, but we thought that we would cut CO2 emissions in a significant way. But the truth is, last year proved to be the highest levels of ever CO2 emissions recorded. Particularly, I'm pretty sure building sector contributed significantly for it. And then the first IPCC report was published in 1990. And we have known for years the reality we're going to be faced with. We have talked over and over again for years about how we needed to come up with solutions. But for all this tact, there was very little action. And then until after 30 years in 2020 and 2021, people, companies, governments rushed to make thousands of commitments to net zero. But most of them don't know how to get there. I wanted to frame that. It's very important to understand the context in which we are going to talk about this. So it became clear last year that in addition to this, the world was not prepared to handle the compounding crisis of climate change and public health. And our buildings, communities, and cities proved to be the least able to adapt and emerge from the crisis. So where is the opportunity? First and foremost, you get it right in the design. If it's a new construction or if it's a deep retrofit, you must focus on integrative design. And that's where your largest opportunity exists, right? Be it your designing your building to be less energy efficient as more energy efficient as Christina pointed out, or really pushing your envelope to going to regenerative design. Those types of things could be accomplished during design. And definitely during construction, it is very, very important that we focus both on the embodied carbon aspects and also the long-term operational carbon implications. And then last but not the least, operations and maintenance. Because, after the building is built, after it is handed off to the occupants, it is very essential that we continue to focus on mitigation efforts as part of ongoing maintenance and continuous improvement. So these are three big opportunities. And we must continue to focus on the end-to-end environmental performance of buildings, communities, and cities. And I think that's where a very obvious opportunity exists. It's pretty simple to talk about, but it's extremely complicated because the entire ecosystem needs to rally behind that vision.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So Katie, on that basis, I mean, if I'm the owner of a building or the occupier of a building, where should I start looking to resolve some of these problems?
I think the first and foremost, based on everything else, is that we know is that is. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. Go for it.
Let's bring you in here. I'm assuming Christina and Mahesh will both have things to add here, but Katie, let's begin with you on this point.
Well, and rightly so, and George and Christina, Mahesh, what a joy to join you today. And I do want to shout out both Christina's organization and Mahesh's. I think hands down, World Green Building Council and the U.S. Green Building Council have done more than any organizations to put front and center. So it's a thrill to join you. I want to build on what both Christina and Mahesh said. To me, first of all, a totally different world today when it comes to buildings. Namely, buildings now being so front and center in the dialogue, in the debate. And I think there's two kinds of drivers that are coming together. Certainly the drivers that Christina and Mahesh pointed to. Where are they pushing? And the two things I see, first of all, on the gotta do it side, you gotta upgrade buildings, you gotta attend to this. You have governments acting, insisting on upgrades. You have investors and financial institutions requiring action and disclosure. And then you have companies themselves saying, look, we got to be part of the solution here. So those are some of the push, but there's some interesting pull there too. And George, I think this starts to point towards the solution sets. And the two kinds of pull or opportunities are, in my mind, technology and money. On the technology side, you do have operating equipment now that is light years more efficient. But even that is magnified through digital capabilities. So when you take kind of siloed, let's say an HVAC system, and all of a sudden you enable it to talk to the lighting system, the security system, the plug load system. And by the way, don't stop there, you make the whole building talk to the grid. You're able to slash emissions by 50, 60%. The last thing I just want to say about all of this is we're motivated by tackling a problem, namely the problem of climate change. But what I'm seeing is opportunity sets being realized where people are starting to have a whole different idea of what a building can and should be. Let's face it, right now it's just a burden on the balance sheet. It's the bricks and mortar you have to have because people have to be somewhere to do stuff. That's being reinvented. And I'll just give one quick example here. Talking recently to a company, a major company in the logistics business. They move stuff all around the world. They didn't think much about their buildings. But now they're trying to align their fleet, which is their key asset. All of a sudden, their buildings have moved front and center. One, making them more efficient, cut costs, but even more importantly, the building is becoming itself a power plant and driving then the charging of those vehicles. So the building is front and center because a lot of actors are demanding action, but people are seeing that there's an opportunity to reinvent building, become strategic assets, driving business objectives.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I certainly identify with that, Katie, in my coverage, talking to investors, talking to building owners. It's something that the issues around net zero have only risen up the agenda, and considering we've had the backdrop of a pandemic and questions about whether there is going to be a return to work, I think that's pretty striking. The question I always have for them, and Christina, I'd be interested in your view on this, is the direction of travel, the intent is quite clearly there, but the understanding of where to start, necessarily how we reach net zero by 2030. Let's just encapsulate it as that, which is what a lot of them have aimed to do. Christina, where would you start? If you're a building owner, a building occupier, what's the first thing, the low-hanging fruit that might be addressed here?
Okay, yes, I would say in those principles, right, or the hierarchy, you cannot manage what you're not measuring. And I guess a company setting targets, using rating tools to achieve goals means that they are going in a direction of travel, and that means they're going to have more and better quality insights into what are the opportunities, right, to make a business that is good for people, planet, and economies. And I guess then when you set a target, George, you are forced to acknowledge where are your improvements, what can you do, right, to get your infrastructure up to par and have it be good quality. And I would also, and I know my fellow panelists will flag this at some point, not only for the sake of the pollution of the carbon, but also because sustainability in the building space makes sense for our own well-being, right? So it goes hand in hand. And so where to start? Prioritize emissions reductions. So we've heard people are now thinking of retrofitting and instead of maybe new builds, right? And restructuring that hierarchy. That cannot be at the cost of a big carbon budget. We have now a limited carbon budget, so it has to be inquiring and asking industry for transparency, environmental product declarations, performance of the systems, of the energy efficiency, the data behind it, and how to make building smarter for us, because us humans have been kind of dumb managing our assets. And so bringing in technology and the data revolution can actually play in our favor. And we can also secure even the people coming back into the offices, making sure offices are safe, well ventilated, and cutting carbon too in the process. So I guess measuring, disclosing, measuring, committing, using resources, and leveraging data in order to make better decisions and all the solutions that are already out there, to benchmark and get yourself in a process where your asset classes are really top investable assets, as now is a trend.
Mm-hmm. And how important is, I mean, you mentioned the measurement there, and it strikes me that there's many different points in a building's life cycle at which you might measure emissions. How important is collaboration in this whole piece? And when we're trying to find a kind of a measure of the life cycle emissions of a building, that's a holistic challenge which brings in the owner, the occupier, the developer, the supply chain. Do you get the impression that we're making progress towards a more holistic approach there, Christina? And how important is that collaboration in this piece?
Thank you so much for that. And that actually is a critical conversation going into COP26, which I think we'll address later. Collaboration is critical because there are so many things that a business can do in terms of their data sets, right, and their benchmarks. If governments gave the right policy signals, right, cities at scale will have better information to understand what is best or current construction practice and performance, and also get then assets to understand if they're overperforming or underperforming. So there is definitely a collaboration and a dialogue on what data sets matter for city officials to make decisions to improve policy, and then for investors to understand how they perform. And I guess there has been a lot of improvement in how we're talking data, and we're talking what are the key indicators. There's miles to go, because let's say a building is very quote unquote complex. There are many systems, but I think we're getting there. And the ESG reporting is also providing those voluntary measurements, and disclosure is very much helping industry look at their peers. And we have cross learning because of that collaboration and disclosure. So it looks very hopeful, because there is some things that are frontier looking, but they are actionable and easy for businesses to reflect on and act upon.
Mm-hmm. Mahesh, you're nodding along there. Are you seeing similar that there is more collaboration around this in the direction that Christina's outlined?
Yeah, I think collaboration has been the foundation of the green building movement, right? When you really look at it, there are more than 100 green building councils that WGBC is constantly interacting with and supporting and enabling their success. And then everybody has come up with a different set of programs and whatnot. And then, of course, our collaboration with the industry is, for example, leaders like Johnson Controls. Not only the collaboration is happening on the demand side, but also on the supply side, but on the advocacy side, but on the policy side. So it's a multi-dimensional collaboration. But what I want to highlight now is, since you asked the question, we need a new type of collaboration. The collaboration that we need is that now we have created our own silos for all the good things that we have done. It's very natural that we start becoming very siloed into our own programs. So if we think about collaboration in the first generation of the green building movement, which is last 30 years, or call it pre-COVID, I think it was focused on incrementalism. It was focused on, basically, I would say, a step change. What we need is a new type of collaboration where we are going for a scale change. What that means is that we have to continue to create the global vision of what's possible, but then we need to continue to localize and meet people where they are. And that requires a very different type of mindset, because, for example, JCI is a global player, but when I go and visit their Shanghai facility, they are customizing that implementation to the Chinese market, and they're disrupting it, right? I walk with them on the skyscrapers, I walk with them on the smaller spaces, but that transformation is magical to me. It's so inspiring. So when we see that implementation happening, by making sure aspiration becomes awareness, awareness becomes adoption, and adoption leads to localized adoption actually leads to acceleration. So I think that's the only thing I would add from a collaboration point of view. I think we need to think from future to present, and really think differently. And I think we are ready for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you've zoomed us out to a 30-year timescale and that degree of ambition, let's touch on COP26 quickly here. And Katie, Christina, I know you're both attending. Katie, perhaps if I come to you on this first, I mean, what are your aspirations for that summit, which I think starts at the end of next month, and how big a role is the built environment going to play in those talks?
Yeah, so if I could sneak back to just a couple of the points that Christina and Mahesh touched on, because they're really critical. First of all, in terms of hierarchy, I do want to hit that because it will enable so much additional action if we do follow a hierarchy in tackling this problem. And namely, if we start with energy efficiency first. The reason that's critical, there are a number of reasons. One of them is most of the interventions we do to dial down the energy appetite to begin with, cash flow. They save money. So that money then is what you can put to work to enable the rest of the journey to net zero to happen, including microgrids and behind the meter energy resources, et cetera. So really critical. They partnerships also want to hit on that, which is certainly relevant to COP26 as well. I really think it's a brilliant insight to focus, as Mesh has just invited us to, away from silos and old paradigms. What we're finding with companies, just looking at companies with commitments for a second, is that it's not good enough anymore to just try to sell somebody a widget. These are huge undertakings, and what people are looking for is genuine partnership of this kind of nature, where you come in and you analyze the assets of that organization. You build a vision and a trajectory together, but then you step up, as we're doing, and even provide financing up front, because a lot of companies right now are capital constrained internally. But when you can provide that up financing and then enable the upgrades, not a big CapEx expenditure, but something that becomes an operational grade where the savings, those upgrades, project happen. It's really as a service. So changing sell a widget to we're together, guaranteeing the outcome. You will achieve your emission reductions, your net zero journey. We guarantee it, and we're in it for the long haul. That kind of partnership that's really turning the needle here in terms of enabling many more people to be able to take on these commitments and get going on their decarbonization journey. COP26, just one word, we're certainly hoping big ambition. I get words. I think this is the time. I've never seen such alignment, and I've been working on climate for 30 years. I've never seen such alignment between governments, the private sector, and wonderful organizations like Christina's and Mahesh's in the nonprofit arena. So the climate's demanding it, the technology, the alignment's there to enable it. So in COP26, let's make it happen.
There's a good call to arms, and I think I'm into your point about the buildings as a service. It's very interesting seeing how there's a shift from. I mean, there's obviously carrots and sticks involved for anyone in this process, but there seems to be increasingly it's carrot led, to coin a horrible phrase, and something like that is an example, but also seeing building owners increasingly thinking about using their buildings as a way of attracting staff back into the office by having low emissions alongside a load of other things, which is, I think, a bit of a step change in terms of their approach. Christina, I wanted to come to you on COP26 here as well, and the same question: what are you hoping for? There is also an audience question which I'm going to ping to you, which is, what do you think that COP26 should be doing to help enforce and compel organizations to reduce CO2 from their buildings? And how do we move them from promising net zero to actually investing without legislating further?
Yeah, thank you. That's fantastic. So fantastic question. And I guess that's exactly, and going into Katie's and Mahesh's points, it is about collaboration, actually. The Cities, Regions, and Built Environment Day session happening on November 11th is quite important because the UK government picked 5 main themes for COP, but because of our advocacy last December, Alex Sharma added built environment and cities and built environment to the agenda. So we are spot on in the conversation. And I guess the high-level climate champions from the non-party stakeholders, as the COP jargon goes, or the UNFCCC jargon goes, have 2 great campaigns: Race to Zero, Race to Resiliency. In Race to Zero, I would tell our audience, go look it up, get involved. If you are a business, set your science-based target, set your target, and start working on how you're going to contribute to the breakthrough moment of every sector. The building and construction sector is almost there in the breakthrough targets of big companies committing to having a trajectory to be front runners and half emissions by 2030. 2030 is the new 2050. 2050 is too late. And I guess that's the other big thing that's been changing in the last few months. And so get involved. And the other would be that we just launched today at World Green Building Council the update to the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment, which has been driving solutions through our Green Building Councils and the Net Zero rating tools, for example, right? That's there as an option. And in that commitment, we have over 140 signatories, and you can check out on our website, how are they doing it? What's their target? How are they decarbonizing their asset classes and portfolios? From all sorts of companies, sizes, shapes, and forms, but also cities taking action, state of California, Scotland is there. So there's great examples there. And if they all meet their mark, they will be advancing net zero by 2030, meaning that we will be contributing to bringing emissions down. So those sorts of action is what is taking on COP26. I think COP26 is not about setting visions, dates, and IPCC report is evident that it's a solutions-based COP. Mm-hmm. And hopefully governments will be up to par with businesses and their ambition, because this is a COP where we have seen amazing business action. First, a lot of commitments, yes, but now we know that businesses will start showing what they're actually doing about it. And I think that's the main difference. And that's where we're going to be seeing those 2 weeks at COP. And that's really exciting, because that will drive this decade of bringing emissions down by half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned the importance of solutions and commitments. And I think there's a role here. We also spoke about measurement a little bit earlier in the conversation. I think there's a role here for some sort of certification. I mean, you can measure things, but equally you need to be fairly robust in what those are driving you towards. And I wonder, Mahesh, I want to come to you on this, whether there is a role for a particular body to come in and say, okay, you have science-based targets in this country. We have minimum energy efficiency standards. We have EPC ratings. We have BREEAM ratings. There's all sorts of things you can sign up for. Is there a role for a particular body to come in and say, here's your net zero built environment certification? It's fully rigorous and it's top to bottom in the built environment.
Absolutely. I know to my earlier point, I touched on this a little bit earlier, is that when you think about collaboration, in the past, we have collaborated to really connect the dots for the market to create a larger awareness. I think now we can be a little bit more confident that we have arrived. Because, when 30 years ago, there was one rating system or two rating systems. Today, we have got more than 87 rating systems. And then on a daily basis, some new rating system is coming up. So we all have to recognize first, we are putting an enormous stress on the ecosystem, because the business leaders ask me over and over again, which system should I use? Where should I focus? And when I turn around, I feel like we're not giving them a core set of strategies, particularly to Katie's point earlier about making a building as a service or a net zero as a service. The service component needs a very clear, definitive framework, and that definitive framework can drive definitive outcomes. Then businesses like JCI can guarantee outcomes. Otherwise, it becomes a moving target. So it's very important that I think the green building movement, of course, World GBC is here, USGBC is here, and of course, we have the convening power of being able to connect with all the other partners. And I think coming out of this COP26 moment and post-pandemic world, there is an opportunity for the green building movement to define a core set of metrics, whatever that is, for the building sector. And that could be expanded to the product development side, that could be expanded to the planning side. That's a natural progression, because what we have done over and over again is we have defined something and allowed the market to follow what we do. So we have established a good amount of credibility that I think we can now be confident about, but we need to be bold and intentional and really choose to come out of our silos. So I do believe there is an opportunity for us, whether it's one body, but it's an opportunity for us to define one standard, a golden standard, to bring all these best practices together while keeping the individual variations independent. But there is a core set of metrics needed, something similar to the UN SDG goals. What moves the needle? I think that's the core set of metrics I think we can collectively pull together in partnership with extended partners.
Okay. And when people do come to you and say, which of these 87 metrics should I be relying on, do you have an answer beyond what you've just said?
It's for me or Katie? Sorry.
That's for you, Mahesh.
Yeah, I think the answer is always, I carry the lead flag every day. So I always say lead is the rating system you should use. But at the same time, when they use a BREEAM, when they use a DGNB, when they use a India Green Building Council standard or the Chinese Green Star label, we always are supportive. Why? Because at the end of the day, when you really look under the hood of these rating systems, they're almost comparable. There may be some strategies that are here and there. But what we always critique against is greenwashing, dilution of standards, things that are not consistent with what will get us to the end state. And so always our if I may want to use the word critique or competition here, it is only for the people who are not doing it the right way. And that's very important, because one of the hardest work the green building movement has done in the last 30 years is to maintain rigor and quality. So whatever we stamp, whoever stamps it, it comes from the place of good intentions and good implementation, and most importantly, good outcomes. So we don't want to ever dilute that, because then we corrupt the ecosystem, and that's no good. So I think that's a very proud achievement of the green building movement, and our partners, obviously, like JC and all. They've done so many projects, but they've ensured quality on the ground, and that guarantees performance. And to me, that is always our answer. So, but do more lead, and we are here to help you.
Okay. We've just had a great question come in from the audience, and Katie, I'm going to put this to you first, but Christina and Mahesh, I'm sure you have views on this as well. What do the panelists believe to be the clearest or most powerful way to identify and quantify bottom line impact of real estate footprint decarbonisation? And more specifically, what are they finding is the most moving line to take with business leaders?
Yeah, well, I think, again, this whole discussion of buildings has moved from a kind of break it, fix it, operate, and maintain to a much more strategic kind of discussion. Touching on the point about carrot sticks and what Mahesh said about standards, that's helped to drive the strategic nature of the conversation now. So, for example, when institutions like the Securities and Exchange Commission come into the mix and will be requiring disclosure, that almost automatically takes the conversation from the basement to the boardroom. And when you have that level of attention, then you really can have a much more strategic conversation. I do want to say that we think rules are important. Very important signal to the market, very important clarity in terms of what objectives need to be achieved. The effective tool at the local level, building performance standards are now being instituted by cities and states in the United States, and they are mandating a per square foot reduction in energy consumption, or CO2. And that's important because it just, again, gives clarity that there are investments that need to be made. I think, to the question about how do you drive that bottom line in home, I'd say two things. One, it's just time. And again, I'll use COVID as an example. So in the height of the COVID scourge, and many places in the planet, including in the United States, are still in that scourge, but we saw some data. The data was stunning. Things were 80-90% unoccupied. But yet the energy consumption only came down about 10 to 15%. That's a stark sign of the huge waste in those buildings. So I think, in terms of bottom line, the story that there's a huge opportunity to make buildings smart, to optimize them, and to drive costs out. And when you do that, it does lead to a broader conversation. And I just want to share one other example quickly, in terms of once in that building, making it efficient, digitalizing it, and enabling more capabilities. You wind up in situations like, so we're working with a hospital, for example. They had the same idea, just reduce the cost of operating my hospital. When we got in there and did that, and then started to digitalize the building, now the building is part of the medical team. Why? Because the sensors in the building understand if Mrs. Smith is having a really bad day and mobilizes the medical team to get into Mrs. Smith. Or the dimmable windows are talking to the sun, and what that enables is get rid of the curtain building. Why do you care? Because in a hospital, curtains turn out to be one of the big things that drives hospital-acquired infection. So the point is, you start in terms of bottom line, we can save you a lot of money if you make the building more efficient. Then, especially now as we have movements that are taking this discussion to the boardroom, you're able to describe a building as a more strategic asset instead of a burden on the balance.
Christina, on that point, I mean, the SEC's involvement, shifting it from the basement to the boardroom, what do you find makes this a more compelling issue for business leaders?
Yeah, thank you. I heard recently from a business leader saying net zero is the biggest business opportunity of this decade. And operationalizing that at the asset class where most of the wealth is invested and across the world, right, makes total business sense. And if businesses are gonna do a new construction or retrofit, it makes total sense to go in this direction now, because actually the responsible investment movement is when taking out their spectacles and looking into how are you addressing the risk of asset classes not being climate change ready, if you like. So and also because it drives innovation. The construction sector worldwide tends to be very conservative, and if you look at the McKinsey charts on productivity, construction rarely changes in productivity. And so something that drives innovation, productivity, is a big business opportunity. And of course, if you drive home the highest energy efficiency possible, that means you're going to be saving costs for a long time. You won't be having to retrofit that asset in a shorter term because it's a high quality, better performing asset. Its life cycle is going to be longer. And yeah, I think also if you like it from the other side, you're also saving an energy supply. And if you invest and you ride the wave of the renewables revolution and how prices have been driving down, and you possibly innovate and generate more energy than what you need and you sell it to the grid, that sounds a business to all of these people. So it is totally a good business proposition. And of course it can deliver innovation in asset classes that will avoid that brown discount from insurers because of not being Paris proof or future proofed as we know we need to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm increasingly in my coverage starting to hear this language of stranded assets and the brown discount, the green premium for offices in particular. But Mahesh, I wanted to come to you and just see if you can build on that point around both the costs of action and the costs of inaction. How much is it going to be to retrofit, let's say, an office like the one I'm sat in, which I'm sure is highly environmentally friendly, but let's say it was a slightly older block. What kind of costs are building owners going to be looking at? And on the other side, what are the costs of inaction as the tide of regulation and investment moves towards net zero?
Yeah, after the pandemic last year, it became very clear what happens when you have inaction, right? It's trillions of dollars, very obviously was documented around the world in a single or a couple of days. The entire global economy was shut down. So you can say $8 to $10 trillion was quantified just in 1 year of potential lockdowns. And this was as much as this was an unpredictable event, it had a predictable pathway, right? You can close, you can go back, but climate change is not coming in that form. Climate change is coming in a completely undefined form. So I don't think we can afford another global lockdown of any sorts. And we have been doing lockdowns for a long time, actually shutdowns through various climate events that's happening around the world. So from the point of view of cost of inaction, I truly believe that that is not even a scenario that we should contemplate, because that basically is destruction, right? I mean, there is no cost for that. Having said that, I think it's very important to understand what we continue to advocate is the moonshots don't work. What we have seen with the adoption of LEED around the world, particularly in the last 12 years, as we went around the world and we implemented LEED solutions around in 182 countries, significant footprint, assets of all types, particularly buildings. What we have seen is that a very clear method that what the market wants is a predictable, repeatable, and scalable method. So that means you don't want moonshots. You want really integrated best practices that needs to be integrated. The businesses need to adopt a long-term goal, but they also need to have a good implementation plan and really have a rigorous approach to implementation. That's why we don't judge a LEED Platinum building to be superior than a LEED Silver building. Yes, from a definition and an implementation point of view, it's superior, but we don't go and put a tweet saying that, hey, LEED Silver is bad, LEED Platinum is the greatest one you should do. No, we always say get started. But every time you do something, you look for continuous improvement. That's what business leaders do. So from our point of view, the cost becomes an issue if you try to do these patch, if you don't take a long-term approach to solve long-term problems, and if you don't institutionalize this best practices. And most importantly, if you have a portfolio, I've seen portfolio owners say this over and over again to me. These 4 buildings will do LEED certification. The others are not part of our LEED certification. I asked them why. Why? Why are you not taking the crappiest building and making it the LEED certified building and make it just LEED certified? That's enough. But then get everybody LEED certified, right? So the point, what I'm trying to get across is 97% of our assets is existing buildings. And we have ignored that in the last 30 years. And that's why last year when the shutdown happened, we didn't have a solution because people couldn't baseline the data. People didn't understand what are the 3 things that they should do to quickly turn their spaces into healthy spaces. And third is that they were nervous because touching this could impact something else. That is because of a lack of plan and a lack of commitment to transform their existing building assets. So if they really think about mitigating costs, they should take a hard look at their existing assets and look at them and say, what can I do today, the very minimum to move the needle? Be it energy efficiency, be it energy storage, be it replacing a Windows panel, or maybe just a measurement to know that where you are. Get on the scale, and then the rest follows, right? So I would say that cost is a conversation that is relative, but what cost are you talking about? Are you talking about opportunity cost? Are you talking about implementation cost? Or are you talking about cost that's actually going to improve your bottom line? I think this is a CFO discussion, and the CFO should pay very close attention to what costs are they talking about. And very quickly they can come up through the liability curve. And the truth is today, technology, service, and capabilities exist to deliver things at cost or at a very less premium, I would say. I'm not here to declare no premium, but there is a little premium, but I don't think that is disruptive considering all the costs that you're going to pay for the lack of action.
I mean, it's a fascinating point on certification, and you'd rather have no stars put on your hotel than 2 stars necessarily, and you'd rather not be a certified bronze building. You might just avoid the whole thing, which is a challenge. But I agree with you. That's where a lot of the best value add is going to be. Katie, I wanted to pick up another audience question and chuck this at you first because of the points you're making around that hospital. Someone in the audience has said, are the panelists aware of the developing NHS net zero carbon hospital standard? And I think that's a vehicle for asking a broader question, which is, what is the role of sector-specific ratings for different buildings?
Yeah, I think that the whole area of ratings is important, again, to mobilize investment and enable people to have clarity as to what the goal and target is. I do think that we can have overarching targets for the built environment, like you see in the building performance standards, where you benchmark essentially against like buildings. So you set a baseline, and then in 5-year increments, for example, to Mahesh's point of get started, in 5-year increments, you are walking up a ladder or down a ladder, up a ladder in terms of efficiency, down a ladder in terms of carbon dioxide generated per square foot. So I think if performance metrics like that, George, those can work for any sector, and you benchmark against like buildings in that sector towards achieving the target. I also wanted to emphasize one of the points we were touching on before, the cost inaction here. There was an economist at the World Bank at one time, Herman Daly, and he had to say is that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. And that is definitely true. We need a healthy planet to have a healthy economy. And I also think that there's so many macro trends here that put this issue squarely and deservedly on the radar of senior leaders of companies, including the whole both millennial generation and the generations come after, that absolutely are voting with their job choices, right? Something like 7 out of 10 people in their 20s and 30s are choosing companies to lend their talents to on the basis as to whether that company has a demonstrated commitment to sustainability and real proven action for intense say on the basis of whether they're seeing that kind of action. And I would just say, for something that we feel strongly about, that the time for sort of fiddling around climate is over and we need to move. There's such a huge and beautiful upside that you can't But I will tell you, in our own company, nothing has put everybody in on positive energy dynamism, but work towards this objective that people feel, one, is larger than themselves, and two, that we have a unique contribution to make. And so I say to any CEO, unleash this in your organization, and it will be a competitive asset that's incomparable. You're like fire, energized.
Excellent. We have just under 5 minutes left. I have one question for Christina, but I want the three of you to think of a single answer to a different audience question, which I'll come to after that, just before we finish. Someone in the audience asks, as an occupier, when we're considering relocation of an office building, I'm assuming here, how can we measure the environmental impact of different buildings against each other? In other words, what's the one thing they should be looking out for as an occupier when they move? We'll have a think of that, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Christina, I just wanted to ask you before we wrap up, with COP in a month, there's a very pertinent question here from the audience. Will net zero buildings be taken seriously by developing countries? And is there a business future in these countries?
Thank you so much for that question. Well, actually, yes. Most of the developing countries are committing and including buildings in their nationally determined contributions going into COP. Developing countries possibly are being more serious in ramping up their commitments in this space compared to the high-emitting countries. And they are taking it seriously. Why? Because it doesn't make sense in the 21st century to have a model of economic development that is carbon intensive and that will do away with your resources and create an economy that is not green. Yes. And actually, I've heard from a great leader from our green building movement from Kenya. She's been advocating Africa must start at zero, for example. Why is this? Because they are leapfrogging in their energy transition as we speak. They are not going into coal. They are going into renewables. And they understand that the electrification cannot be at the expense of energy efficiency. Energy efficiency must remain the top priority. And for even a developing country, using the best design, passive design, that's low tech. That is just bringing awareness to industry to design according to climate, to the uses that people need, to culture and place. And of course, what Katie has also been explaining in terms of bringing in active efficiency, automated response, all of these developments. Of course, some building types will use it, but I'm confident developing countries have got this. Their floor space is going to continue to grow. They're urbanizing. Why have bad quality cities? If every dollar that is not invested in quality infrastructure will demand $10 more along the way just to renovate the housing, for example, stock. So governments are coming to the realization that it's better to invest in quality decisions or infrastructure, not necessarily over the moon in costs, but with good policies that make sense and that bring good ventilation, good lighting into homes, and systems that enable people to have a healthy and happy life. So I'm very confident they've got this. And the awareness we've done over this 30 years of leadership from USGBC, 20 years of World GBC, we're going to be next year having our little birthday. We've built something that has finally today going into this, the decade of climate action, a moment where governments have heard about this, understand the decisions, and through collaboration that we've mentioned, they have access to making better policies and choices. So I'm very optimistic. Great,
fantastic. And very quickly, because we're at time, Mahesh, what would you advise this occupier of a building to look out for?
I think you should get on our org platform that was designed exactly for that reason. Measure your energy, water, waste, transportation, and human experience. These 5 categories gives you a score, and that score allows you to know what is your environmental footprint holistically. And most importantly, how it is benchmarking as the rest of the world. So just to give you an idea, last year alone, we have gotten over 22,000 buildings participating in this program of different space types and different sectors. And the idea here is to be agnostic of any rating system, but to be able to give an outcome-based environmental report, and it's simply a score. It's like your credit score. So I would recommend this occupier to jump onto our platform and find where the boundaries are.
So the USGBC app. Katie, a quick one.
Yeah, same. I agree. And I would add, let's do a double shot. Let's do healthy places and healthy people. So I would add, let's do LEED well building, the well building certification, and the two together, because as we're making places health safe, we can also then dial down filtration, ventilation, appropriate to who's where in a building, enable us to cut carbon while we are ensuring that people are healthy and safe. So LEED plus certification.
That's the well-building standard. Great, thank you. And Christina, final word.
Oh, final word. Let's not lose sight. Let's not lose sight of that. The world is big and wide and faces different challenges. Heating is not the only problem. Air cooling, air conditioning is the biggest electricity demand growing right now around the world. So I know energy efficiency is a little bit old in the discourse, but let's make it the Cinderella again in the room and make it a priority. We need to make it happen.
Great, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Christina, Katie, and Mahesh. I've really enjoyed the discussion. I hope the audience has too. Thank you all very much for joining us. It will be available to view on demand for the next 30 days. And thank you all for your contributions and excellent questions. We'll see you again soon.